I'm not going to lie, I may have cheated about this. This video was supposed to come out last week before the Australian Grand Prix came out, and obviously I've decided to do it after. So we've had a round of F1 in 2026. I mean, it's a lot earlier than what I did last year, because last year I did them in May. So, I'm a full 2 months ahead of myself this year. But yes, F1 27 driver lineups. Oh, it could be unchanged. Well, that's it. All 22 drivers will remain the same. That's my prediction. Well, if you have enjoyed this video, I'm joking. I think there will be some changes, but there's not going to be many, which, is surprising in the fact we saw little change for 2026. For this year, 2026. Hopefully we could see a few more changes, but I'm going to start at Red Bull. Max Verstappen and Isaac Hadjar. Yes, I personally don't see Red Bull changing from these two. Hadjar qualified P3, sadly was unable to show his true pace. He had not the greatest starts, to be honest. Not as bad as Antonelli's starts, but, unfortunately for Isaac, his race came to a short end as the Ford Red Bull power unit, decided to blow up. So, and obviously there are potential issues with that power unit, because Lawson was almost a non-starter as well. So, yes, but I don't particularly see Red Bull leaning away from Hadjar. I've spoken about the fact that obviously they don't have the Evil Doctor and Christian Horner anymore. So, Verstappen, there's talks that he could walk. He's competing in some endurance racing while we're not actually doing any racing, potentially because of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. So realistically, is he going to stick about? Potentially. I see Verstappen potentially deciding to stick this out until his contract is up, basically. And I think after that, he doesn't renew his contract and he walks away from F1. That's the feel I'm getting from Max. He's not loving the sport at the moment. And realistically, they're not going to make changes to it. They're obviously talking about making changes to the amount of electrical power compared to the engine. And I think they're looking to doing that after this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix, potentially ready for those to be ready at Japan. Now, is it going to improve it? I don't know. It depends what the ratio between electrical power and engine power is going to be. How quickly can the manufacturers, turn that around? It'd be more practical if Bahrain and Saudi Arabia are cancelled. We've only got Miami at the start of May, between now and Canada at the end of May, and they could say to Miami, we'll push you back a few weeks because we need to focus on this. There is a chance for them to do that. Back to my driver lineups. For Verstappen, he's obviously not enjoying the racing. To be honest, I didn't enjoy the racing. I said quality over quantity to F1's reply, which probably got hidden as well. If you're not familiar with that, they were hiding with all the negative replies on their overtakes post earlier as well. And I've waffled on too much. I apologise about that. So we've had 4 minutes. I've already told you who's going to be at Red Bull. I can't really see Verstappen just leaving just yet. I think he's going to stick around for a little bit, but obviously his mind will be turning towards the exit door at this moment in time, I think. But it is still early days. I also think, also unchanged, racing balls. So this is despite the fact that Nicholas Sholov, I've butchered that name, so I apologise. He's a Bulgarian driver. He's in F2 and he won the feature race. Currently he's the F2 standings. Does he have what it takes to get promoted? Who knows? It obviously depends on how Lawson does, because Lindblad had an absolutely cracking debut. Got to Q3, finished P8, scored some points. At one point he was P4. Obviously the car's not really there, and I think, that it is lacking a bit of pace, that car, but the fact he was still able to be there, shown a good promising debut. So he does have a bright future in Formula One, does Arvid Lindblad, and I don't think that Red Bull will be looking towards him as Verstappen's replacement in a couple of years' time, I reckon, as well. I think Lawson, do they keep him in just for one more year? Potentially. It depends. It's a tough call between Soloff and Lawson. If Soloff wins the championship, then I'm going to put him over Lawson. If he doesn't, then I will put Lawson over Soloff. Soloff another season in F2 potentially. Yeah, that's a bit more borderline on that one, but not as problematic as for Ferrari. I'm going to go for Charles Leclerc and Ollie Behrman. The problem that Ferrari have is that they have 2 seats and 3 drivers to think about. So, yes. Obviously, Behrman had a quiet qualifying and pretty quietish race, Got helped out a little bit by the safety car and potentially a jump start as well. With the FIA looking the other way on that one. But despite that, his pace is starting to come well. He scored points. He scored way more. He scored 7th place. He was far ahead as well. Comfortable against Ocon as well. Although Ocon, of course, potentially may have had some sort of issue. I don't know. But yeah, Ferrari potentially at this point need to think about the future. They need to think about who's going to be taking this team into the next era of Formula One. Is that going to be Leclerc and Hamilton? Now, obviously, Leclerc's still contracted until 2095 in terms of Ferrari terms, which is actually 2029. So I don't think he's going to leave. Obviously, there were talks of him potentially leaving, but the Ferrari looks good. I don't see him leaving. For Ollie, P7, if he builds on that, which I think he will, he's in good form, as he proved at the end of last season. I think he's going to carry that form onwards as we go through this season and give Ferrari a massive headache. For me, for Lewis, it's a shame that obviously he has to go out this way. I'm hoping that he can bow out. Trying to win an 8th world championship. But if not, that might be the end of his chances of getting. Does he stay at another team further down the grid? There are options for Lewis, and I'll come back to that. But I first want to talk about 3 teams. First of all, that he won't be at. Haas, obviously, although Toyota are their partner. I've forgotten the name of the bloke that they got on F2. He didn't have a great weekend. He sort of got promoted. Same with Colton Herta. Didn't have a great weekend. I'll come back when I talk about Cadillac about that one. But obviously, somebody who did have a great weekend in Formula One on his debut was Rafael Camara. I think it was his debut. Yeah. He looks promising. I called it from the first time I saw him in Formula 3, and I don't really watch Formula 3 that often, but the fact at times he was dominant in Formula 3, I think that he could be a good shout for the title in Formula 2, as well as he gets to grips with those cars. And I think Ferrari will want to continue that trend. Leclerc, is he sort of getting to... he's been Formula 1 7 years now. At some point he's going to get towards the end of his career, and obviously Ferrari will also have one point on that. Is Leclerc going to carry... Leclerc could carry on as long as Alonso, in which case he's got another 10-15 years in the sport, but also he could not. He could decide to call it a day a lot earlier. And that's what Ferrari, I think, might be thinking about. Chuck Behrman in there and Chuck Camara in there. Now, whether or not they decide to give Camara longer than Behrman, that's another discussion for the future. Probably one we're not going to see at least discuss until 2030, which is frightening to think is almost around the corner these days. Mercedes, this is probably based on Toto's smile and the results, the easiest one to predict for next year. Stick and put Russell Antonelli. I know there's always been a load of Verstappen talks, but I can't really see them doing much. For Antonelli, obviously he crashed and still managed to qualify P2 as well. So yes, we need to see a bit more from Antonelli, I personally think, but obviously Russell looks dominant at the moment, and I hope I'm proved wrong. That battling with Leclerc at the start in the opening laps potentially looks good for us, potentially to see them too, but we'll have to wait and see what changes either through the 1st of June regulations about the temperatures, and also potentially what they're going to do about the battery as well coming up. But yeah, as I said, Antonelli's the future of that team, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. Russell, makes sense. He's won the first Grand Prix. I do think that sometimes he can get a bit whining, and he was whining on the radio. He needs to stop that and focus on winning, but overall it's a good start for Mercedes. Same can't be said for McLaren, but I don't see Norris or Piastri leaving. I can't really see a spot for where these two could go. Obviously Red Bull could be one spot where one of them goes to if Verstappen leaves now, but potentially they could just say, Lindblad's impressed, we're going to put him and promote him. Aston Martin's off the table because of their poor performance. I'll come back to them in a moment, but these two, they obviously Piastri span out on the formation lap. The curse of the Australian at the Australian Grand Prix continues. Lando had a poor Grand Prix, he had a woeful start, and then he just did what he did usually and fell backwards towards recovering Verstappen. So yes, I personally think they need to do a lot better, but obviously that was their first time using the actual Mercedes engine as opposed to some older spec cut engine that they were using in testing. Aston Martin, I've put Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso. This could be a seat that Lewis moves to, but I don't really see Alonso budging. I think he'll sign a new deal. Stroll's got a life contract there anyway, so yes, realistically, I can't see them changing. Obviously, they will want Honda and obviously New and Alonso. That partnership could go well, potentially if they get the engine sorted, but obviously Alonso right now is reliving his worst nightmare as well. This could be a place where Hamilton sits in, but I can't realistically looking at that car now and saying, yes, I want to move here. And Alonso, don't get me wrong, I would love to see Hamilton and Alonso back in the same team, bringing that team back to glory, but I can't see it happening, and I don't think that it's going to work at this stage. But we come to some teams where Hamilton could sit. Alpine. So obviously Alpine have got Gasly and Colapinto. This team said, yes, Briatore said, yes, we're going to be fighting for podiums 2026. We're going to have the Mercedes engine, it's going to be glorious. And what actually happened is they scored 1 point. And part of that was due to some people falling out of the top 10. Their pace of their car is awful. And it shows that, under Flavio Briatore, in my opinion, they've got worse. I think that I'm of the opinion now that he is more of a hindrance to that team than a progression, and I think that they need to get somebody else in. If you look at so many other teams that have made progress, it's the fact that they have an engineering person, someone who understands the engineering side at the front. Now, For Alpine, they don't really have that. I know Flavio's technically the special advisor and they're not some other person that's supposed to be team principal, but Flavio, technically, we all know, is the man in charge here. We've all seen that clip from Drive to Survive where he's telling about Colapinto to speed up, where the fact that the car is actually awful. Yeah. Could I realistically see Hamilton? I think, there are people that are invested in Alpine, the Hollywood celebrities and co, that are invested in that team. And some of them, I think some of them didn't, some of them divest their shares or something, I don't know, but I just can't see it, Hamilton going there. So for Alpine, unchanged, Gasly and Colapinto, I mean, that team, they must be depressed. And the people who made the Renault engines must be smiling right now, saying, you're holding, basically Flavio and Alpine come out and saying, you're holding us back, you're the reason that this car is terrible, we're going to get rid of you. And they've got rid of them and the car is still terrible as well. Audi could also be another place that Hamilton goes to, but it could also be a place that Sainz goes to, because Williams, not that great. Now, Audi are showing some real promise, but obviously they had that issue with Hülkenberg, but the pace is there, and I think obviously reliability is just going to get better. So, despite the fact they had issues with Hülkenberg, they got both cars pretty much almost into one. I think one of them didn't get into the Q3, but they're there or thereabouts, top of the midfield. It's a good start for Audi in Formula 1, for life round in Formula 1. I don't really see them moving on because obviously Audi want a German driver. Bortoleto is, I think, the future of that team. He shows some good pace, so I can't really see them moving on just yet from Hülkenberg and Bortoleto. And for Williams, this leaves those two drivers in a rock and a hard place, because that car is even worse than the Alpine. They had such a good start to 2025. They had such a good 2025 where they finished 5th place in the constructors, and we were thinking, yes, let's build on this. Let's improve the car. If this is what 2026, we're all hoping that we see Williams back at the front for 2026. We saw them back at the front for 2014. We were thinking, yes, why not? That hasn't happened here. And, Albon and Sainz really struggling. For Sainz, obviously, it wasn't a great weekend. Liability issues meant he couldn't take part in qualifying as well. And obviously, the car is awful on pace. But nowhere as near as bad as the final car, Cadillac. So Cadillac obviously will be looking for Colton Herta. Again, like with Audi, they were wanting a German driver. Cadillac wanted an American driver in Formula 1. That's why they paid to put Colton Herta in Formula 2. What I've seen on the opening weekend, he won't be making it to Formula 1. Colton Herta. So they really need to think about what drivers they do want. But the problem with the Cadillac is it's a dreadful car, and I'm not joking that yes, the Ferrari engine, they've got the Ferrari engine in the car, which at this moment in time is not the best engine on the grid. That clearly is the Mercedes. The Ferrari's not far behind, but the problem for Cadillac is that their car is the worst car in terms of chassis and aero on the grid. It is by far the worst. It is terrible. Bits are just falling off. The mirrors were flapping about like there's no tomorrow. This, don't get me wrong, we knew this team would be at the back. It's a brand new team after all, and they've created everything from scratch. They haven't, but it shouldn't really have been this bad. If you look at the last team to enter, that was Haas. Yes, they bought a lot of things from Ferrari, but they still had to make the chassis and everything. So, for Cadillac, they haven't even got to making their own engine yet. And if it's like this, I don't particularly see them making their own engine. I think them seeing that delaying them till the next engine regulations in the 2030s before they actually make their new own engine, and the car is a lot more stable. So what about their driver lineup? Now, Cadillac are lacking sponsors, and I think that, you know, signing Lewis Hamilton, they would say absolutely we would want a 7-time world champion. Would Lewis want to spend his time at the back building this team up? Probably not. And I'm probably going to say that if Lewis loses his seat for Ferrari, I can't see another seat for him, which is a shame. Obviously there's always been that talks of him going back to McLaren, but until one of Norris or Piastri leaves, then, you know, he's not able to slot in there. And obviously they've also got Fornaroli, who's sitting doing nothing as far as my understanding. I don't think, because he's not an F2 this season, so I don't know actually what he's actually doing this with himself at this moment, other than sitting in a simulator. Again, Fornaroli's career could end up like Jack Doohan's, you know, where that was always a problem. The fact he wasn't racing, you know, if you're not racing, then I personally think that, you know, you need to be out there racing, doing something. Yeah, could Lewis take a sabbatical? Potentially. Would it end up as long as Mika Häkkinen's sabbatical? Potentially. You know, would he? If for Cadillac, this would be a major signing. He would bring a lot of sponsorship with him, and would also develop a lot of sponsorship for Cadillac, which I think that they probably do need to make upgrades to their facilities and stuff. The fact that they're saying, oh, we don't need sponsors, well, you clearly do. You know, the sooner that Graham Loudon and co realise that, the better it will be for that team. So, yes. But I still don't think that Lewis will say yes to that project, because they are so far behind in terms of aero and Sashi. You know, bits are falling off. I think that for Lewis, you know, I hope that he is able to win this year's championship, because he could not be on the grid next year. And for me, for Cadillac, I'm going to stick with Perez and Valtteri Bottas then. But, ladies and gentlemen, that is all 11 teams. Let me know what you think in the comments below, what your predictions are for 2027. If you are new around here, though, then please do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. Until the next video then, I'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy your day, and goodbye.